Welcome. My name is Daniel Stillwell. I am the editor of the IFTA e-newsletter, and today we have with us Linda Hershman. She is someone who's been writing a book. She was actually showcased in 2019 in one of our e-newsletters about the work that she was doing and a greater life lesson about you never know when you're going to find a passion. So, stay curious and be engaged. But she's back with us to let us know a little bit where she's at in her process, talk about the book now that it has been finalized and other work that she may be doing. So Linda, welcome.
It's great to be back again. Thank you.
So just as a reminder, and we have an international crowd, so if you could start off with what kind of mental health clinician do you identify as, and what does that look like in your context?
Okay, well, I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, and because we are international here, I am in Pennsylvania, USA, and I also am an EMDR approved consultant. And so my work is very trauma informed, even when I'm working with couples, or maybe especially when I'm working with couples. And so I do a variety of things. I'm also an AMFT approved supervisor, American Association of Marriage and Family Therapists. And so I do a lot of supervision of therapists who are preparing for licensures, LMFTs.
Wonderful. Well, we will jump to the main topic today, which is Gray Divorce, the book that you were able to come up with. Tell us a little bit about the concept, how you came up with the idea, and the process over the last, especially 3 years since we originally interviewed you.
Well, the concept kind of found me. I had received an invitation to submit a proposal to the 2019 IFTA conference, which was being held in Aberdeen, Scotland. I had been wanting to go to Ireland for a while, and I thought, gee, if I can do a workshop at the conference, I can also go to Ireland and write some of it off on taxes.
Mm-hmm.
One of the benefits of doing this kind of thing. And so I started thinking about what might have international appeal. And at the time, I was doing some writing for newsletters and magazines locally on gray divorce. And I was curious about whether this was a US thing or if it was a thing all over. And as I did a bit of research, I found out that sure enough, gray divorce is becoming very common in every country in the world where divorce is legal. So I submitted the conference proposal, it was accepted, off I went. After I presented on gray divorce at the conference in Scotland, I received a phone call from the acquisitions editor from Routledge Press asking me, have you considered writing a book?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I hadn't, but if you're calling me, I guess I'd better. I started doing, as part of putting together a book proposal, you need to research the competitive markets. And as I tell my supervisees, my job is not to see what's already there. My job is to see what you're not seeing. And what I saw as I was doing the competitive research on this is there were a couple of things. There were a lot of books out there about gray divorce. There is Gray Divorce, the seminal book in the field, which is a big, thick, statistics-heavy volume written by sociologists that I don't think the general public probably reads. And then there were a couple of different categories of books on the topic. One was Surviving and Thriving After Gray Divorce, personal stories. One was books written by lawyers and accountants on financial and legal planning before, during, and after gray divorce. And then there was another genre that I call the Girlfriend's Guide to Gray Divorce. And they were books written mainly by women who were in their 40s and 50s whose husbands divorced them for younger women. And the tone of
Mm.
the book is, hey, girlfriend, I'm going to tell you how to survive and thrive and make him regret that he ever left you. The missing pieces were there was nothing culturally competent out there. There was nothing systemic, and there was nothing inclusive, and there was nothing informing therapists, divorce, and other divorce professionals. And I thought, okay, here's my book. So long story short, I submitted the proposal. It was accepted. I ultimately turned down the contract with Routledge because, to paraphrase Bob Dylan, I gave them my heart and they wanted my soul. They just wanted rights that I was not willing to give up. And I decided to self-publish. Here we are.
Mm-hmm. So what was the self-publishing experience like?
Very mixed experience. There was a part of me that was thinking, isn't it great that at my age, I can learn how to do so many new things, especially with technology?
Mm-hmm.
And there was another part of me that was thinking, at my age, why do I have to learn so many new things about technology? But like anything else, I made mistakes along the way. If I had a redo, there are certainly things that I would go back into the Wayback Machine and change in terms of the process. However, the book is out both in ebook and in paperback. And going forward for my next book, I will not make any of those mistakes again. I may make others, but I won't make those mistakes.
Yeah, the supervisor once told me the first time is always the hardest. So if you can do it again, you'll benefit. So I'm glad that you're already thinking about what's next. The how has the accolades, the people's responses, how has all that kind of hit you at this point now that it's officially out there?
Well, of course, it's always really exciting when I get a great review, especially when it's from somebody like Bill Doherty, who is one of the preeminent marriage and family therapists in the field today.
Mm-hmm.
And I love seeing that. It's funny you asked that question right now, because on, I guess, Friday or Thursday, I got my first review by a Karen. I've been
Okay.
Karen for the first time. Yeah. Which I actually found really funny, because the review, it was a 1-star review, and she wrote in the review that there were too many chapters and she is not interested in reading about groups that she's not part of.
Okay.
And I was thinking, okay, Karen, we don't care about other people who are not like us. You actually said that out loud,
Mm-hmm.
number one. But number two, I was thinking, you sort of missed the point here. It's like if you were to walk into a restaurant, order surf and turf, and then complain that you don't eat meat. So I just went with bad publicity is better than no publicity. And my hope is that there are some people who are going to read that review and look at it and say, that sounds like the book I need to read.
Mm-hmm. Right. Just because the book isn't what you wanted doesn't mean it's not a good book. And for those who are watching who are not familiar with the sarcasm and the Karen's idea, it's basically someone who is going out of their way to put someone down, often in a trolling sort of capacity, like online. At IFTA this past year at Puerto Rico, you also presented on adult children of divorce. So how have you continued to nuance this idea of either family systems as they age and separate, and try to figure out what happens after that?
Well, one of the things that I really want to communicate is that there is this myth that when parents of adult children divorce, the kids are not really impacted. They're old enough, they can understand it, they can absorb their losses and just move on with it. And in many ways, they are actually more impacted by the gray divorces of their parents. And I also, if we could just take a second and clarify, when we talk about gray divorce, the term refers to divorcing over age 50.
Okay, thank you.
So yes, so there are ways that adult children are impacted, and from a systemic basis, from a family therapy kind of basis, because they are adults. Number one, as I said, they're expected to just understand, well, these things happen and go on. They experience it as an ambiguous loss that is not recognized, that they don't get to grieve. They experience their own losses, especially oftentimes financially and in terms of childcare, of things that their parents were providing or promising to them that they can no longer do once the parents have to split the assets, and they get triangulated. It creates all kinds of loyalty issues. And the biggest losers in gray divorce in terms of parenting are the fathers, because and I don't know how much you want to get into it, but for a variety of reasons, it's all in the book, adult children tend to be more aligned with their mothers because, number one, their mothers were there more when they were growing up. And number two, because oftentimes their mothers need a lot more help with things than the dads do. Paying bills, knowing how to use the computer, hanging pictures, things like that.
Okay. And yes, of course, when we're also talking about gray divorce, we have to recognize that there are generational or cohort issues involved as well. Because if these people are divorcing at 60, then they are by definition people who did not grow up with the internet. And so being able to look at what does it mean to be resilient as as a single person, at 55 or 65, suddenly becomes very different than what the society often tries to push for.
Absolutely.
So, okay. Are there areas that you feel like you're about to go into in terms of maybe not like empirical research per se, but anecdotal, trying to do interviews, trying to study a little bit more into this? What's the next chapter or the next book that you're thinking about?
Well, I have two books in mind right now. First of all, this book, Great Divorce, Everything You Need to Know About Later Life Breakups, originally, when I was in talks with Routledge, the book was supposed to be a guide for therapists, clergy, divorce attorneys, and other divorce professionals. Once I decided to self-publish, I realized I needed to open it up to the general public and create a wider audience. And I still have, even though there's a lot of information that will be really helpful for therapists and other divorce professionals in understanding the complexity, the dynamics, the different parts of divorcing in later life or making the divorce decision, I took out all the material that was specific to therapists and divorce professionals. And so I am wanting to put together a companion guide for therapists and other divorce professionals that is an adjunct, is a good collaboration with this book. And the other thing that has really caught my interest, and hesitate to say it because I don't want anybody to snag my idea, but I'll take a chance. But when I was writing the book, don't ask me why, but for some reason, the chapter that I found absolutely the most fascinating, the most engaging was the one on LGBT and mixed orientation marriage divorce.
Hmm.
And it was the only chapter where I literally had to stop myself from keep writing more and more because I didn't want to unbalance
Right.
that chapter with everything else. But what has captured me is I really want to write a book for partners and family members whose loved ones come out or transition in later life.
Hmm. Yes, just even clinically having clients that have done that, it would have certainly been helpful to have a resource to help process, all right, what questions are useful, what are common pitfalls that everyone seems to be struggling with in that regard. So that sounds like a wonderful resource.
And not only that, but in doing with research and in talking with people like Joe Court and with other therapists, Francine Barbetta, who runs straight spouse support groups.
Hmm.
One, I think the most important thing I learned is that that the person who is coming out or transitioning does so at a very different time from the family members.
Right.
They have had years, sometimes a lifetime, to process this, and their family members and loved ones are just starting to hear about it, and it creates a great disparity in terms of who knows what and when they knew it. And there is this movement on television now where they're showing all these families where somebody is coming out or transitioning later in life, and the way it runs, and I could give you names of half a dozen shows and movies like this. The way it runs is the spouse or family is really angry and upset and hurt for 3 episodes, and then all of a sudden they're all incorporated into one big happy family.
Hmm.
And it's not like that in real life. Very rarely is it like that in real life. And this is something that needs to be understood.
Right. Yes, I think that for people in the viewing audience who may not be familiar, mixed orientation marriage is often the idea of classically a heterosexual couple. One of them comes out as gay and they're still married. They're still trying to figure it out, even though their sexual orientations may not be in alignment. And so trying to wrestle with what do we do? How do we stay together? That type of thing. And for people outside the West, there are some cultures where the idea of staying married regardless of orientation is essentially required. And there are some that even the question of how do we engage the non-heteronormative practices, preferences, orientations is still a relatively new question. So being able to give people guidance and say, what does this look like in your cultural context? Make sure that you're staying in sync with your country, your culture, your values, that type of thing. But here are some really important questions that we seem to find repeat in a variety of situations. I think that's going to be a really cool thing to be somewhat at the forefront of. So that's really nice.
And I think you can probably tell from the way I'm talking about it that the thought of doing this book really excites me.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for stopping by and telling us a little bit about your work and where you're at these days. I assume you will be presenting or hoping to present in Malaga, Spain next year.
I am planning to present in Malaga, Spain. One thing COVID has taught me is don't get too attached to plans.
Yep.
There are so many ways it could fall through.
Mhm.
However, yes, I have been accepted to present on discernment counseling, which is another chapter in my book. And it's a brief protocol for couples who can't decide whether to go into marriage counseling or to move towards separation and divorce. And it's about making a decision. And I'm also excited about that because Bill Doherty, who developed discernment counseling. I have been in contact with him recently, and he sent me a couple of new studies that have come out about discernment counseling that I'll be able to incorporate into the presentation that I am just learning about myself.
That's fantastic. And, some of the people who watch this may know him or be familiar with his stuff. And so the fact that he's going to be able to be a participant in your work as well will be awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has been a pleasure. And we'll see you around.